For 40 years, the people living under my own roof looked at me like I was a piece of old furniture. They were just waiting for a good reason to haul out to the curb the useless old man in the back bedroom, and then, one Sunday afternoon, with a whole family sitting around my kitchen table, my phone rang. It was the bank. And in about 90 seconds, every single person in that room found out exactly whose money they'd all been living on this whole time. I'm real glad you're here with me today. Honest, I am. Do me one little favor while you listen. Drop the town you're tuning in from down in the comments, because I read every one of them, and I'll call you out by name. And a like, a subscribe, whatever you've got in you. That stuff keeps a small channel like this old man's breathing more than you'd ever think. Okay, let me tell it to you right, because here's the thing that lived in my chest for 2 years. My daughter-in-law, Diane, she was on the phone in my kitchen one afternoon, didn't know I was standing in the hall, and I heard her say, word for word, she doesn't contribute a thing. He just sits back there in that room waiting to die and eating our groceries. Our groceries, in my house, that I paid for. That's been paid off free and clear for 30 years because my wife and I killed ourselves to own it. And she stood in the kitchen I built and called me a freeloader, and my son let her. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I need you to hold on to that word, groceries, because by the end of this, you're gonna understand just how funny that word really is. There were 2 things that family didn't know about the quiet old man in the back bedroom. And when those 2 things came out, at that table, on that Sunday, in front of everybody, I watched Diane's whole face come apart in real time. So let me back up and tell you who I am and how we got there. My name's Walt. Walter, but nobody's called me that since my mother. God rest her. I'm 78, and I spent 39 years standing at a machine in a die shop over in Wyoming, Michigan, just south of Grand Rapids, making the tooling that stamps out parts for cars you've probably driven. Good honest work. Loud, though. My left ear's shot, and I blame every bit of it on that shop. Me and my wife Ruth bought a little ranch house out in Ada back in 1974, before Ada was, you know, Ada, before the money moved out there. Back then it was farmland, and a couple gas stations and us. 3 bedrooms, a walnut tree out back that dropped those green things all over the yard every fall and stained everything they touched. Ruth hated that tree. I loved it. We raised our boy Greg in that house. And here's the piece you need about me and Ruth, because it's the whole key to this. We were savers. I mean cheap. The kind of cheap where Ruth would rinse out a Ziploc bag and hang it on the faucet to use again. We drove cars till they died and then drove them a little more. I carried my lunch to that shop in the same dented metal box for 39 years, a bologna sandwich and an apple, every single day, and the guys razzed me about it the whole time. But here's what those guys never knew. Every 2 weeks when the check came, before we paid a bill or bought a thing, money went out the door and into an account, and we did not touch it. Started at $25 a check in 1974, which was real money to us then. And I want you to hear me. I was no genius. I didn't know a stock from a hole in the ground. But an older fella at the shop told me once, Walt, you put a little in every check, and you leave it alone, and 30 years from now, you'll thank me. So I did. Boy, did I. 40 years, every check. And I never told a living soul how much was in there. Not one. Not even Greg. Especially not Greg. Ruth knew, of course. And there were nights later on when that number got to a place that honestly scared us a little, and we'd sit at that kitchen table with a cup of Sanka and just look at each other and laugh, like us, the bologna sandwich people. But we never spent it. That was never the point. The point was, we'd worked hard, and someday it'd take care of the family. And knowing that felt good. Then Ruth got sick. 5 years ago now, pancreatic. 4 months from the day they found it to the day she was gone. Everybody says fast is a blessing, and I guess it is, compared to the other way, but it sure didn't feel like one. And when she went, something in me just went quiet. The house got too quiet, and that's when Greg and Diane moved in. Let me tell you about those two. Greg's my only kid, and I love him. A father's gonna love his boy no matter what. But Greg grew up soft in a way me and Ruth never meant. He wanted the look of things. The newer truck, the boat he used maybe twice, the kitchen with the big island. And Diane, his wife. Oh, Diane came from money once, or the memory of it. Her people had a little and lost it, and she spent her whole life trying to look like they never did. And here's a piece to file away, because it comes back around. About 15 years ago, Greg's little heating and cooling business almost went under. Bad winter, equipment he'd financed, a partner who walked off with the deposits. He came to me one night, sat right at that table, and my grown son cried. And he said, "Dad, I'm going to lose everything, and Diane doesn't even know how bad." And I quietly paid it off. All of it, $80-some thousand, made a call, moved some money, told him it was handled and to pay me back whenever. No rush, no interest. He never paid back a dime. And within a year, the way he told it around the family, he'd pulled that business back from the edge himself, through grit and hard work like I was never there. And I let him have it. That's what you do for your kid. But Diane started telling a different story. Diane started telling people I was a burden. So they move in after Ruth passes. And the story is, we're going to take care of Dad. And for about a month, sure. Then it turned. First they moved me out of the big bedroom. My bedroom. The one Ruth and I shared for over 40 years. Because Diane said the light was better in there for her work. She sells supplements on the internet. I never fully understood it. So I got the back bedroom, Greg's old childhood room, a twin bed and a window that looks at the neighbor's fence. Then they gutted the kitchen, my kitchen, tore out Ruth's cabinets, the ones I hung myself in 1981, and threw them in a dumpster without asking me. And I stood in that driveway and watched a kid toss my dead wife's cabinets into a bin. And I didn't say a word, because by then I'd learned that saying words in that house just got you the look. You know the look. The one that says, "Oh, here he goes. The old man's confused again." That became my whole job in that house. The confused old man. Any opinion I had, anything I remembered one way and they remembered another, it was, "Dad, you're getting mixed up, Dad. Take your pills. Dad, go lie down." They talked about me in the third person while I was sitting right there. Diane would have her supplement friends over and I'd shuffle out for a glass of water and hear her go, "Oh, don't mind him," and then that little laugh. And that's the world I was living in the day I stood in the hall and heard her say, "I don't contribute a thing. I just sit back there, eating their groceries." And I went back to my little room, and I sat on that twin bed. And I'll be honest with you, 76 years old, and I cried like a kid. Not because it hurt, though it did, because I realized she genuinely believed it. It wasn't an act. Diane truly thought I was dead weight, a burden mooching off their kindness. And Greg let her think it. Sat there and let his wife call his father a freeloader in the house his father owned. And that's the night, sitting on that bed, something in me went cold and clear, and I stopped crying, and I started thinking. So now let me tell you the two things they didn't know, because everything hangs on these two. Thing one, that house they were living in, remodeling, throwing my cabinets out of, that house was never in Greg's name, not for 1 second. Years back when I got all my affairs in order, I put the house and every dollar of that account into what's called a revocable living trust. If you don't know what that is, don't feel bad. Neither did Greg and Diane. And that turned out to matter a whole lot. Simple version. It's a legal setup where you, the person who made it, control everything while you're alive. You can change it any time you please. And it says exactly who gets what after you're gone. And the trustee, the one holding all the keys, was me. Walt, the confused old man in the back room, held the legal keys to that entire house and everything in it, and not one of them had a clue. Thing two, that boring account I'd been feeding for 40 years. Every check, every bologna sandwich I ate instead of going out to lunch. By the time Ruth passed, between what we put in and 40 years of just leaving it alone, that account had grown to a little over $2,300,000. $2.3 million. The bologna sandwich people. And you want to know the best part? The part that still gets me. Every so-called family expense traced back to that account if you followed the string. Greg's business bailout. My money. The grandkids' braces that Diane made such a show of covering, quote, through the family account. My money. That trip to Florida, everybody posted all the pictures of the new truck in the driveway. A piece of every bit of it came, if you followed it back, from the old man in the back room. They were living on my money and calling me a freeloader while they did it. I know. Just sit with that a second, because I had to sit with it a long time. So what did I do? Well, first thing, I did nothing. And I know that's the part people don't like, but hear me out. For almost 2 years I just watched, and I kept my mouth shut, and I let them keep believing exactly what they wanted to believe, because I learned something standing at that machine for 39 years. You don't swing the hammer till the part's lined up. You wait. You let it come to you. And in those 2 years, a couple things happened. First one is my granddaughter, Katie, Greg and Diane's oldest, 26 now. And Katie is the one bright thing in all of this, so remember her, because she matters at the end. Katie was the only soul in that house who treated me like a person. She'd come by on Sundays with a coffee from that Bigby place, the one I like with too much sugar, and she'd sit on the end of my twin bed and say, "Tell me about Grandma again. Tell me about the dye shop." And she listened. Actually listened. Her mother would holler up the hall, "Katie, leave him alone," and Katie would roll her eyes and stay. That girl stayed. The second thing that happened is they got greedy, which I knew they would. Greed's like water. It finds the low spot and it fills it. Started small. Diane began leaving these glossy brochures around, assisted living places out in Kentwood, real nice pictures, old folks laughing over cards, a lady getting her hair done. She'd leave them on the kitchen table, real casual, and say, "Oh, Walt, wouldn't it be nice to have people your own age around? Wouldn't that be so much easier for you?" Easier for me. Sure. Then Greg started in. "Dad, this house is a lot to keep up." "Dad, we've been thinking. Wouldn't the smart thing be to sell while the market's hot? Put the money somewhere safe? Get you set up somewhere they can really look after you." Somewhere safe. He kept saying that. And I'd nod and say, "Let me think on it, Greg." And I'd watch that little flicker of frustration cross his face, because the old fool wouldn't just say yes. And here's the moment it almost went sideways on me. I still get a chill telling it because I came this close to losing everything through my own soft heart. One Sunday, Diane's got a real nice dinner going. Pot roast, the good plates, and I'm thinking, this is different. And after we eat, Greg slides a folder across the table. And there's a man there I've never met, some fella in a golf shirt Diane calls a family friend, except he's got a little stamp and an ink pad. He's a notary. And Greg says, "Real gentle, Dad. This is just some paperwork so I can help you handle things. Medical, financial, so you don't have to worry anymore. It's called a power of attorney. Everybody your age gets one. Just sign here and here and here." And you know what? For a second, I picked up the pen. I did. Because it's easier, because I was tired, because he's my son and there's a part of an old man that just wants to believe his boy loves him. And I had that pen on the paper, and I looked up and caught Katie's face. She was back by the counter and she gave the tiniest shake of her head. Just no. And I set the pen down and said, "You know what? My eyes are tired tonight. Let me read this over this week and we'll do it next Sunday." And the temperature in that room dropped 40 degrees. Diane's smile went flat. The notary looked at his watch. And Greg said, "Sure, Dad, no rush," in a voice with a whole lot of rush in it. That night, Katie came to my room and sat on the bed and said, "Grandpa, don't sign that." And I said, "I know, sweetheart." And she said, "Do you know what it actually was?" And I said, "I've got a pretty good idea." And she looked at me funny because she was starting to figure out that maybe the confused old man in the back room wasn't so confused. So that Monday morning, first thing, I called my attorney. Rich Okafor, downtown Grand Rapids, drew up my trust years ago. Known him 20 years. And I said, "Rich, I need to come in. I need to change some things, and I need to do it quiet." And over about 3 weeks, we did. I changed the successor trustee, the person who'd run everything if something happened to me, from Greg to a neutral bank trust department, so nobody in my family could ever get their hands on the controls. I made sure that on my passing, the house does not go to Greg. I set a real chunk aside in a separate trust just for Katie, for a house of her own, and to finish the schooling she'd had to drop because her folks wouldn't help. And the rest I pointed at some things Ruth cared about. The food bank she volunteered at, the animal rescue, places that actually do something. Rich looked at me when we finished and said, "Walt, you sure? Greg's your son." And I said, "Rich, I've got one son, but I've been more of a father to that money than he's ever been a son to me. And Ruth would have done the exact same." And he nodded, because Rich knew Ruth. Now the last piece, and this is where it all comes together, and I still can't tell it without my heart going a little. That big account lived with a trust department at Fifth Third, and my contact there was a woman named Sandra, sharp as anything, handled my stuff for years. And in all her managing of the, quote, family finances, Diane had never once actually talked to Sandra, because Diane assumed the money was Greg's business and my little pension. She never dug, because it never crossed her mind there was anything to dig up. The confused old man couldn't possibly have a thing. So I called Sandra and said, "Sandra, I need a favor, and it's a strange one. Next Sunday at 2 o'clock, I need you to call my cell. And I need you ready to confirm some account details out loud when I put you on speaker." And she said, "Walt, is everything okay?" And I said, "Sandra, everything's about to be just fine, because that next Sunday was the day." Greg had told me we had, quote, some family things to discuss, which I knew meant one more push to get me to sell and sign and shuffle off to Kentwood. And Diane had the whole family coming. Greg, Diane, Katie, their boy Tyler, my grandson, not a bad kid, just goes with whatever's easy. Diane even had her sister there for backup and one of the supplement friends. Full house, big audience. Perfect. So we're all around that table, the same table where my son cried and I saved his business. The same table where Ruth and I laughed about being the bologna sandwich people. And Diane's got that flat business smile going, and Greg clears his throat and starts his speech. "Dad, we all love you so much, and because we love you, we think it's time to talk seriously about the house and about getting you the care you deserve." And he slides the folder over again. New notary, different fella, and there's the deed papers, and the power of attorney, and a listing agreement from a realtor, all laid out, all ready for the old man to sign his life away. And Diane leans in, real sweet, real poisonous, and says, "Walt, we've been carrying you for years, and we're happy to, but it's time to do the responsible thing. We've been carrying you." And I just looked at her, and I said, "Real calm, Diane, before I sign anything. I want to make one quick call, just to be responsible, like you said." And she smiled, thinking, oh, he's finally being reasonable. And Greg smiled, and I took out my phone, and it was 1 minute to 2, and I said, "Oh, hold on, I think this is for me." And right on the dot it rang. And I answered and said, "Oh, hi, Sandra. Yeah, we're all here. Let me put you on speaker so everybody can hear. We're just doing a little family financial planning, and I want it all above board." And I set that phone down in the middle of the table, right next to the folder full of papers, and Sandra's voice comes out, clear as a bell. "Of course, Mr. Reinhardt, happy to help. Now, for verification, I'm speaking with Walter Reinhardt, the grantor and trustee of the Reinhardt Family Trust. Is that correct?" And I said, "That's correct." And she goes, "Wonderful. And just to confirm the assets we hold in the trust for you, that's the residence at the Adder address, held in full, no mortgage, and the managed account, which as of Friday's close sits at $2,318,000. Did you want to review any transfers today, or go over the beneficiary changes we finalized last month? And I want to tell you about the silence in that room. I've stood next to machines that could take your arm clean off. I was in the room when the doctor told us about Ruth. I have never in my life heard a silence like the one that came down over that kitchen table. Diane's face. Oh, Diane's face just came apart. Slow. Like she was doing math, and the math kept coming out wrong. 2 million what? Under whose trust? The residence held where? And Greg goes, "Real quiet. Kinda strangled, Dad. What is she? What account is that?" And I picked the phone back up, took it off speaker, and said, "Thanks, Sandra. That's all I needed. I'll call you Monday." And I hung up, and I set the phone down, and I looked around that table at every one of them. And I said, "That's my account. That's 40 years of bologna sandwiches. That's the money that paid off your business, Greg. The money you told everybody you earned yourself. That paid for Tyler's braces and Katie's first 2 years of college, and that trip to Sanibel you posted so many pictures of. That's the money you've been living on while you called me a freeloader." Nobody said a word, and I turned to Diane, and I said, "You told somebody on the phone 2 years ago, and you didn't know I could hear you, that I don't contribute a thing. That I just sit in that back room waiting to die and eating your groceries." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. And I said, "Diane, there has never been one single grocery in this house that wasn't mine. This house is mine. It's in a trust. I'm the trustee. And last month I made sure it stays that way whether I'm here or not. You can't sell it. You never could. It was never yours to sell." Then I picked up that folder, the deed, the power of attorney, the listing agreement, and I didn't tear it up dramatic or anything. I just slid it back across the table to Greg, real slow, the same way he slid it to me. And I said, "So no, son, I won't be signing. And here's the part I think about the most." Greg didn't yell. He just put his face in his hands. And I don't fully know what was in that. Maybe shame. Maybe just that number doing loops in his head. All that money sitting right there the whole time. But Diane got loud, stood up, and started in about how dare I hide money from my family, from the people taking care of me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. And her sisters chiming in, and Tyler staring at his phone like he wants to fall into it. And it's chaos. And through all of it, I looked over at Katie. And Katie was crying. But she was smiling too. And she mouthed at me across all that noise. She mouthed, "Grandma would be so proud." And that right there, that's the moment I'd waited 2 years for. Not the money, not even Diane's face. And I'd be lying if I said Diane's face wasn't something. It was Katie. Somebody in that room who saw me. So how did it all shake out? I'll tell you. They moved out. Took about a month, and it was ugly. Diane fought it. Said all kinds of things. Even threatened to have me evaluated. Which, go ahead, I passed with flying colors. The doctor actually laughed, but at the end of the day it was my house, my trust, my rules, and Rich made the whole thing airtight. Greg barely spoke to me through it. Last thing he said loading the truck was, "You humiliated us." And I said, "Greg, you did that. I just stopped paying for it." I don't hear from them much now. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up. A son I saved, who let his wife call me a freeloader, who tried to put me in a home and sell my house out from under me. Some things don't stitch back together, and I've made my peace with that mostly. Some nights are harder than others. He's still my boy, but I sleep fine now, and I didn't for a long time before. I stayed in the Ada house about 6 months. Then I found I didn't want all that quiet and all those cabinets that weren't Ruth's cabinets anymore. So I sold it, my choice, my price, and I bought a smaller place up near the lakeshore out toward Grand Haven, where I can walk down and watch the water and the big freighters go by. Katie moved into her own house last spring, one I helped her with, and she's back in school, and she comes up on Sundays and brings me that 2 sweet Bigby coffee, and we sit on my porch, and I tell her about her grandma and the dye shop, and she listens. She always listens. And I want to leave you with the one thing I've figured out, sitting up here by the water at 78. And it's simple, but it took me a whole life to really know it. People will tell you your worth. They'll decide it for you, real confident, and if you're not careful, you'll start believing them. They looked at a quiet old man in a back bedroom and saw nothing, saw a burden, saw somebody waiting to die, and the whole time I was the ground they were standing on. So don't ever let somebody else do your accounting for you. You know what you put in. You know what you're worth. Keep some things quiet, keep your feet under you, and never ever sign the paper just because you're tired and they're smiling. The truth keeps. It'll wait for you, same as it waited for me. And when it finally comes out, and it always comes out, you just want to be the one holding the phone. Take care of yourselves out there, and go tell somebody who saw you when nobody else did that you're grateful while you still can. I wish I'd told Ruth one more time.